Hello, I'm Nathalie D'Hers, and thank you for joining me as I present Charged: Women in Action, a series of conversations intended to catalyze change for women in technology. I've been with Microsoft for a little more than 20 years now, and although my title is Corporate VP for Microsoft Digital, my passion is for improving the employee experience and the tech space for women in general. And here to join the conversation is my friend and industry leader, Danyel Bischof-Forsyth, the first ever woman chief technology officer at Tyson Foods. So welcome, Danyel, and thank you for joining me. And perhaps to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming the first female CTO at your company?
Thanks, Natalie. I'm really happy to be here. And when I think about my journey, I've had an incredible 33-year career so far. And thinking back, as I look at that journey, really the first part of that was involved in tech from a computer science degree, getting involved in programming. During that first 8 years or so, I also had 3 children while I was working. And then I shifted into really the middle part of my career, which was about 15 years, all of this at Hallmark Cards and IT. And I had an opportunity during those 15 years to have rotational assignments throughout the entire technology space and led in each and every functional area within IT. Towards the end of that 15 years, I was coming to the end of my Hallmark career. I had another 3 children and made the decision at that time to leave Hallmark after 28 years and go on another journey with Tyson Foods. And I really did that based on the opportunity to learn and grow. And so that was 5 years ago. Have been at Tyson ever since and have really enjoyed the journey.
What an incredible journey. And I'm excited to talk about our topic with you today. We're going to be navigating emotional labor today. And emotional labor is the unpaid and often unnoticed work that we do to keep those around us comfortable and happy. And women tend to carry the burden of emotional responsibilities, both at work and at home. And they can also have a negative impact on our well-being, and it's a contributing factor to burnout. So, Danyel, I'm so glad you're here today to help us unpack this really important issue and then help raise awareness around the impact that emotional labor can have, and then, but also explore ways to help women better tackle and persevere in the workplace.
I appreciate you asking me to come and have this discussion. As the sponsor for our Women's Employee Resource Group, as well as the Women in Technology organization we have here at Tyson, it's a very frequent topic that we have and one that's critically important as we attempt to encourage more women into the technology field. We've got so many barriers, and this is one of them. And I do believe there are several strategies we can use to overcome.
Awesome. Well, let's dig in a little bit. So the term emotional labor was originally coined in 1983 by sociologist Arlie Hochschild to refer to jobs that require people to manage the feelings of others at the expense of their own. But the definition has since expanded, and studies show that women shoulder the majority of responsibility in relationships, both in careers and at home. And this is ongoing emotional work that's exhausting and rarely gets acknowledged. And when I talk to colleagues around me around the subject of emotional labor, I've learned a lot about the different expectations that are put on women in the workplace, and everything from always feeling like you have to be the one to be positive and peppy, in the workplace, to having to shift your behavior to meet certain perceived stereotypes. For example, I've learned from some of my minority coworkers that they feel like they have to bring their authentic self that others believe them to be, instead of bringing forward the person that they actually are. But also, things that might resonate, which is adjusting to communicate with male colleagues, or, how to communicate in male-dominated meetings, how to deal with disagreements without being perceived as rude or aggressive, which is something that we women often think about. And then for some women, being a supermom, trying to do everything, dealing with mom guilt. If you're at home, you think you should be in the office. You're in the office, you feel guilty because you're not attending, a school activity, and you're the primary go-to and primary caregiver in every situation. So I'm curious, Danyel, do you hear the same around you, and what sorts of challenges and scenarios do you hear about when it comes to emotional labor for women in the workplace?
Yeah, when it comes to emotional labor for women, I absolutely hear many of the themes that you mentioned, from just how individuals are interacting in the room, and especially mom guilt. As a mom of 6 children, I can absolutely speak to that. When I think about the opportunity, to have the conversation in the room about what it means to be many times the only woman in the room, and many times being looked at differently than male colleagues, for me, I've really been on a mission to have conversations around awareness. So many times I will have, the conversation with a colleague, especially a male peer, and they won't even realize maybe how something was handled in the room or how I might have been treated differently. Nobody wants a situation in where somebody is bearing, an unreasonable burden or something that is not fair within the team. And I think if people are aware that this goes on and having these tough conversations, then once they are aware, I would expect that behavior would change. And I'm even willing to make suggestions for things that others can do to make the environments be welcoming and, very, very productive and positive for everyone in the room.
I love that.
And then,
You're making me think too, it's like this notion of also creating an environment where people feel safe to bring up those issues and have those open conversations and learn, really.
Yeah, what I would add is when I think about this growth mindset and making sure we're all learning together, biases are created from the experiences that we've had and our upbringing. And, our experiences are what they are, and we all have different experiences. And if we can share differences with each other, it raises that awareness of different perspectives and how people view things differently.
One of the things that I'd love your perspective on is, what's changed since COVID. COVID has led to, women that are more missing from the workplace than before COVID. I believe that there's 1 million women that, are missing from the labor force compared to the pre-pandemic. And historically, men have had higher rates of unemployment than women. And in April 2020, however, as the pandemic took hold, women's unemployment surpassed that of men by 4.1%. And it hasn't returned to the pre-pandemic levels. So I'm curious, Danyel, what trends do you see that you believe might be leading to this shift? And what changes do you think need to still happen for women to step back into the workforce and get us back to the pre-pandemic levels?
Yeah, without a doubt, I'm seeing also this shift in no matter how hard we try to recruit and bring people on board, we're just not seeing the numbers in the workforce that, especially pre-pandemic, like you mentioned. And so, I think that there's several items when you look at how to make that better. I think, one thing really is, are we creating environments that are conducive for women to come into the workforce and be able to balance the demands of work and home? It's not work-life balance. It really is work-life integration. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that we hold space and have an environment for women to come in and be able to manage. I think in addition to making the environment, I think there's things that we as women, and me as a working mom, I know specifically that we can do that can help with being able to take on the demands of work as well as balancing what we have at home. And for me, I think there's a lot of strength around making sure I have a great support system. I think one of the best decisions I have ever made is the partner that I have that can help, we have the discussion around how do we try to balance, home and work, and how do we make sure that it's fair and equitable. And we talk about when I'm incredibly stressed that maybe I have a higher demand at work and need a little more support. I also, you mentioned earlier this idea of mom guilt. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves and think, I can't possibly come in and come back if I've taken a break or, come back into the workforce and manage that. And I think we put a lot of that pressure on ourselves. And I think there's something empowering around, making our own choices, leveraging the support system we have, and being very vocal. Being vocal if we need, if we need help, if we need to, take advantage of, a friend, a family member, to help us with the demands that we have, and just ask.
It's interesting you say that, Danyel, because if I could go back 20 years when my kids were very little, the one thing I would do differently is make sure that I have enough help around me. I felt like at the time I had to do it all. I put that own expectation on myself and I carried that burden. But I feel like I always need to almost overachieve, right? Whether it be at work or at home, and be everywhere and be, there for everybody. And you're right, like just having a strong support system and asking for help is so important. And I think that's something that, I think I learned the hard way over the years.
Right, me as well. And I think not just asking for help is so important, but I think really not putting the pressure on yourself. And so I remember, again, also, Natalie, if I could go back 20 years, I remember I had 3 young children in my 20s, and I was just doing everything I could to make it to every event and to be everywhere and be everything for everybody. And I finally figured out that it wasn't healthy for any of us. I was late to everything. I was speeding to try to make it to events. I was not making it to everything I wanted to because I had set the bar so high to be supermom that I was not going to be able to achieve that. And so in resetting the expectation about what I could make it to reasonably and where I would be for the most important things and communicating that to my family and friends, and then it took the stress off from trying to achieve what I was never going to be able to achieve. And then I owned that choice, communicated that choice to those that I care about. And then I focused on then doing what I said I would do. And, we feel a lot of guilt because I think we feel like everybody's judging us. And you just have to let that go and know that, if you have an agreement with you and your family, your friends, your coworkers, your children, and you're living up to that, those choices you're making and that expectation, then nobody should judge those choices. And then 15 years later, when I had 3 more children, and a little bit different perspective, it was much easier for me and less stressful to manage the situation because I was in constant communication around expectations.
That's a great tip. The other thing that I learned from a mentor many years ago was, to your point, making those decisions and being okay not being able to do everything. And so the thing that this mentor taught me was, and then once you've made a decision, don't look back. Because it's so easy to make a decision and then say, well, maybe I should have done this differently, or I should have made a different decision. But this mentor said to me, you make your decision and you don't look back. You're done. Like you've made a decision, move on, right? You're good with it. So that also helped me over the years as I struggled sometimes with those decisions too. The other thing that I think is important is being able to say no. And I find that, especially as women, sometimes we have a hard time saying no. And for the longest time, I know about you, but we used to tell women, like you have to do it, you have to do it all, lean in. I think it's okay to say no. And as a matter of fact, you need to say no. And Robin Arzon for Peloton says something I really like. She says, you must say no to protect your yes. And I think that's just so powerful because as we have a tendency to say yes to people and to everything we're asked for. And it's okay to say no. It's okay at times to say, sorry, I don't have time for this. I'm curious, what your experience has been in terms of being able to say no.
Yes, the saying no, Natalie, is so incredibly important. And it is something I have learned how to do more effectively over time. And for me personally, what has worked is, I think about what are my priorities and does this thing I'm being asked to do align with my priorities? And if it doesn't, and again, what works for me is I will communicate the reason why I'm saying no, what I'm choosing instead. And that is my choice. And those are my priorities. And it's very empowering for me to be able to do that because I agree. If you don't say no, you really can't focus on what's the most important to you and what you have committed to do. There's only 24 hours in a day.
Exactly.
And so it's important that we're choosing how we spend that.
Going back to the point you made too about being transparent with your family around the events you can go to and those you can't go to. I find that in the workplace with your teammates and coworkers, that's also really important. So it takes a little bit of that, pressure off of you as well.
And sometimes we might have to take a step back from a career standpoint. And I think communicating that and being transparent is absolutely critical there as well. And then I would see on the flip side, and I've talked to a lot of women about this, is that when you're ready to be, back in the game and ready to really put the pedal to the metal from a career standpoint, you have to be vocal about that too.
Exactly.
People are going to make assumptions. Don't let them make assumptions. Actually tell them what your plan is and what you're aspiring to do. And I think that transparency is what I think about, and that is completely key.
Yeah, and advocate for yourself, to your point. Really hard. You're your own best advocate, for sure. Thank you. So Danyel, quick question for you in terms of this notion of burnout that we're seeing quite a bit, across the industry. From your perspective and your experience, what is it important that we do as women in order not to get to this point where we're burnt out and that we are prioritizing ourselves?
Yeah, I think Natalie, it's a great point around prioritizing ourselves. In order to make sure that we're balanced at work and at home, there's a large element of self-care. And I learned pretty early on in my career, I had a time management class, believe it or not, that I went to. And we had a pretty lengthy assessment where we had to share how we spent our time. So if you took 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, lots of questions around how we currently spend our time. And then through choices in the questions, they got to how we wanted to spend our time or needed to spend the time. And we got the results in the form of two pie charts. One was what our current, how we spent our time was allocated, and then what our desire was. And I learned two big things that I have carried with me over 30 years. One of those is individuals are very different. And so when I looked around the table at the results of mostly women at my table and their pie chart, a lot of them had, 30% of, individual time, me time, and then the split between family, friends, and work was the remainder. Some were very, very small. Mine was a 5% slice for personal time. And so a big aha was that we each have different needs. And so that wasn't an issue. There wasn't a right or wrong. Where it became a problem or an opportunity was if then your second pie chart of what your ideal would be or what you needed, if it was different than what you were getting. But really, I think the bottom line is if we don't have self-care and don't have balance, the stress that we can create for ourselves will carry through work, home, family, all of those things. And that's why it's so important to have that to be able to manage. Yeah,
and I don't know if it's the same thing for you, but what I find is that when I start to slide off my ideal balance, it's hard. It becomes really hard for me to come back to the ideal, distribution of my time, because you go down a path so much sometimes that it becomes hard to backtrack out of that. So keeping an eye on that all the time, I think, is really important. And I love the idea of the current versus the ideal and making sure that you're not steering off path too quickly, too much. One of the things that I learned also over the course of my career is that, I had a tendency early on to redo things if they weren't done 100% the way I wanted them to be done or I expected them to be done. And so, and that was true also at home, where I would just naturally just do things because it was sometimes faster for me to do them rather than waiting for my husband or my kids to do them. And so I think this notion of really giving grace to yourself and others, and start to manage your own expectations where, hey, I'm going to delegate this and it's not going to be done the way I need it to be done, but that's okay, I think is really important. I'm wondering, Danyel, if you've experienced the same thing over the course of your career and how you manage that.
Yes, when it comes to delegation, that is something that absolutely I've developed over the course of my career as well. I think when I look at women, especially women in tech, probably overly proportionate, there's perfectionists within that community. And I think this idea of not expecting everything to be perfect, and really the idea of when is good enough. We all want to do the 100%. We all want to have everything be perfect. But actually, 80% in many cases is just what we need. And so I think there is this element of determining when good is good enough. And really, I've learned that if I delegate something to another team member, even at home with my children, that they will many times surprise me in how they get to the end. I can always, provide the vision or what the outcome is. And as I continue to see that, it's almost exciting for me to be able to delegate and see how somebody else will go about doing the task.
Well, Danyel, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really appreciative of your openness and your willingness to tackle this really important topic with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's important to talk about this topic of the cost of emotional labor. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I hope the experiences and insight that Danyel and I shared today were insightful, and that perhaps will lead to some of you re-examining your emotional labor, and more importantly, will inspire you all to take more charge of it. The conversation reminded me of a post I recently saw on LinkedIn, and the post was from CEO and founder of Ella, Erin Gallagher, and she referenced Jacinda Ardern's decision to step down as Prime Minister for New Zealand. And in it, Erin says, let's normalize giving our jobs and others everything we have to give them, but not everything we have to give. I think it's a really empowering idea that women can send a strong message when we acknowledge we're stepping back to prioritize ourselves. It's a sentiment that so closely connects to this emotional labor conversation that has been ongoing for some time. Change will never happen if nobody is talking about it. And so I'm grateful to women like Danyel and many others in our industry who are bold enough to discuss important topics like this one head on. We're in this together. Stay charged, take action, and be good to yourselves.